This story is improvised by Jesse T. William and Tucker Patterson. It contains themes of abuse and sometimes intense depictions of violence. The story does not seek to glorify violence. Standing outside of your father's home, under a vast and beautiful starscape and the light of the moons. Early in the night, Cesarine, as you stand out here, what are you feeling?
I think the standing in front of the door brings a very different thought process than what was happening maybe even 2 seconds earlier. I think that there is a kind of, as I said earlier, a great amount of unease for Cesarine, kind of leaving that situation with his dear friend in the way that it was, but also not feeling like he can kind of turn around and confront that. But I think that standing in front of the door, there's a very new and different, not new for Cesarine necessarily, maybe just new for the observers, a different dread than the one that was had before.
As you stand outside, a simple home made from bluish-gray wood that grows in the red-leaved trees. I think your father's home is sort of on the outskirts of Boulogne. I think there's a degree of isolation here that always scared you. It fed into the dreams. You're always taken from your bedroom window into the forests where you would be hunted. As you look at that door, the weathering across the edges, generally an indication or indications around the home that it has not been very well maintained. This is a small town. You know that by the end of the night, you have to be in bed here. And if your father is still awake, the earlier you get in, the better. But I imagine sitting with that dread, this first decision is very difficult.
I think it's like ripping off a Band-Aid or taking a shot of alcohol. You're very, 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 very hesitant. He probably sits there maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes. I think when there is a decision to open the door, to step in, and he will, it is fast, like taking a shot or ripping off a Band-Aid. Once it's done, it's done. You just got to get it over with.
Stepping toward and opening the door, there's a rush of adrenaline, feelings, fears. And you open into an empty room. I don't think there is particularly a lot of space in this home. I think there's probably a front room with like a kitchen and a table, whatever foods, many things hanging, like items of food hanging across the windows. There are some like druidic herbs that help preserve things. You probably see on the far side of the room, on a skinning table or hunting table, a dead Odral who is adorned in these like herbs that will keep it as is until tomorrow. You hear from one of the back rooms your father snoring, which I think is both an abrasive kind of sound, but also like there's the sense of security. He's dead asleep. And you don't have to worry about stepping around him. I think there is above the rooms, or above the, I think around 3 rooms, kind of like an attic space as well. I think you and your brother shared a room growing up, and eventually he just crawled into the attic. Your bedroom is to the right, closer to the kitchen.
See, there's a lot of contemplation happening. And I think there probably is a lot of contemplation happening for Cesarine in his mind as well. I think there's like a thought about seeing if his brother is home for the same reason he knows he should be home. But then there's like the going upwards, maybe more no. I think that in this moment, at least for right now, the move is to, as quietly as possible, move into his own room.
I think each step on the floor, I think the floor is like, it is wooden, but sitting kind of on top of dirt, with not much of a solid foundation. So the dirt kind of will sometimes seep through the floors. The boards do creak, and I think from what we're already kind of established about Cesarine, I think he might be the one, or the kind of person who would be mindful enough to like know where the creaks are and step around them. Cautiously, timidly walking through this space which you reside in, or will reside in, for at least the next few weeks. Passing by perhaps a ladder that goes up to the attic into your room. Your bed probably still left a mess from when you were last there months ago. The window that you used to have nightmares about that looks out into the kind of sparse forest. The sounds of bugs of the night and occasional calls of more nocturnal critters on these islands. To interject just the smallest ounce of humor, there is a bird which is called a diam bird. Diam birds are kind of these small, very round, very fast birds. They're very stupid. And I think as you step into the room, close the door, there's this slam against the outside of the wall, and then a thud on like the soft ground outside, and then like just so much quiet before like you hear shifting in the grass, and then like the like fast flapping of wings, and just like flying off. But I think it like gets your heart for a second. Really the only thing to do is like sit on your bed.
There's a little bit of a back and forth. And it starts out like kind of soft at first, right? Just little like pangs of like betrayal about the conversation you had with your teeth earlier. But there is sometimes a very strong feeling of like, I guess I have to go back and like I have to fix that somehow. But also a very like innate rejection of the thing that wants that comfort, that doesn't want to be at odds with the comforting thing he does have in his life. I think it kind of maybe grows a little bit louder as he thinks about it, a little bit more like bubbling guilt or like betrayal, just bad feelings overall. That I think eventually kind of shifts, the thought process shifts into, well, it's the obvious option for him, right? Safeguard for Dotig. They both kind of knew it was coming, and in return, maybe they both knew that the Legion is what ultimately was coming for Cesarine. Maybe there's a little bit more of a little bit of like a shithead spiteful feeling of like I guess maybe I will. I guess maybe I'll go speak to Clarion again. Clarion, that's her name, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, oh God, I think he doesn't want to do that. I think in kind of a similar way, like, I think especially sitting in the room by the window that he has nightmares about, like this particular thing, and then having that thought and like looking at, like, kind of catching the window, there is like another piece of dread that just like sinks in his stomach at that very moment. But also, what's he going to do otherwise? Catch crabs forever?
I think you will toss and turn for quite some time with those thoughts. I think there's even like quite a bit of time before you even make the choice. I think there's just a lot of sitting and ruminating before eventually like making the choice to go to bed, fall asleep, or attempt to fall asleep, toss and turn, and eventually come to rest. The anxieties and uncertainties about the future before the morning light begins to leak in through the window, which I think was always a comfort. I think the horrors of whatever the white night is, they don't feel like they exist as much in the day. It takes another form. You can hear your father moving about outside your room. I would like to retract a statement. I don't think it's morning light. I think you probably sleep in to like noon, but regardless, begin to notice and feel the light through the window that finally wakes you. But you hear your father moving about outside of the room.
Very carefully sit up, try to get dressed. So, something very normal, but like probably the thought process of being somewhat presentable. Like there's a process of like eliminating anything that could be potentially picked at the moment that I leave this door, like leave here. Whether that means I make that bed and straighten up the room and get dressed and make sure my hair doesn't look like absolute shit, just anything that could be potentially commented on, I would like to minimize as much as possible. any little thing, I think.
This, I think, is perhaps an appropriate time to use our reputation. I think that's a simple, sensible thing that you're upholding within the town of Milan as the child of a member of the Legion, as well as just a member of the community. You have one reputation dice. This is a D4. Up until you do things in the town that further your reputation, it will remain as such. This is going to be really like your first more sensible role in this second episode. Although you had one last session, it was a little bit different. So I'm going to have you roll 1d20 plus 1d4. The d4 is just your bonus. And I think I will look for a 10.
18 on the d20, which is scary for me personally. And then 4 on the d4. Jesus Christ.
2.
If you make me roll later, I'll probably roll very bad. That's how it goes, and I don't like that. I rolled mediocre.
I think there is a little bit of, what's the word? There's like an energy from speaking to Clarion of like you are closer to actually aligning to the Legion. And I think that reflects in your posture a little bit. If there's any like facial hair, I imagine Cesarine, like kind of shaves it and keeps himself very clean, putting your hair back in whatever kind of style needs to look presentable. I don't think we really discussed like what does Cesarine's God? I want to call you Clarion. What does Cesarine's hair look like?
So in my head, I imagine when Cesarine was young, there was probably the way he looked was probably more at the liberty of like his father. And I would take the guess that his father probably had an idea of what his children being presentable is.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine Cesarine has always kind of kept it at least close to whatever that was. However, I think at this point, like over the last month or so, it's maybe a little longer than it would usually be kept. And I think that there is probably a bit of like catharsis, and when he is away from Balon, kind of being able to just let it be however it falls, compared to how he would probably keep his hair when he's here.
Do you cut your hair to make it look more in line with what your father might expect?
Today, yes.
So as you spend whatever time with whatever kind of clippers or scissors you might have, or a knife even, I think you've probably done this before. I think like for the last couple of summers coming back, not wanting to have shit from your father. Sometimes you may have rebelled once or twice, but I think there is a degree of like you can have a couple of inches of hair. I think your father even has longer hair than some of the Legion because he's retired and it's kind of falling away. But you cut your hair shorter. As you open the door into that main room of this small home, immediately this smell of blood, but a kind of like muted, weirdly fresh smell of blood from those druidic herbs, something that you're probably used to. But you see your father, who is, I think, quite a tall figure, even in his middle age, is physically imposing, very muscular, pale skin, I think light brown eyes, black hair that's curly, generally kept back, I think, graying black hair, and a grayer beard, which is very well maintained, but even still like a little mangy for some Legion. But again, he's not active. You see that he has begun work on gutting the Odralin. The innards are outards now. I'll ask you a question. Somewhere within this room, on a kind of mantelpiece, there is a item of your father's. It is a souvenir or trophy or prior piece of equipment that he used when he was a mercenary. So he's been a mercenary, he's been a part of the Legion. Those two things kind of blur together. What do you think this is?
I think maybe a sword. Mostly because I know that oftentimes swords are kind of viewed as an extension of oneself. And his father strikes me as the person who would take that very seriously.
I think that makes sense. You see the sword hung up above the mantle. Across the hilt, a relatively like straight, long sword, but of a color and vibe that is definitely not Felian. There are two, or rather there should be two gems on either side of the hilt, but there's only one kind of red gem. As your father hears the door open, he will turn around and he has blood on his hands and a knife in hand as well. Will look you in the eye and look you up and down, presentable as you are. I don't think he says a word. I think he turns back to continue to gut the Adral. You see as the body like shifts with the momentum of the knife. A non-reaction is good.
I think there's a goal here, right, for Cesarine, which is get to a point where he can either leave as best as possible or be unbothered by his father. However, there is to do so, I imagine that there's an easier way to get this done that takes longer. And then there's probably the hard way. So I think that instead of doing something like asking, right, what could be done? If there's anything he already knows just from living in this house over years that needs to get done, things that are usually expected of him over the summer, he will just begin doing it without sort of saying anything.
I think
that is the fastest and safest way.
I think seeing your father gutting this Adral, I think helping in the process, helping clear, getting meats or whatever the goal is here, assisting with that process. You see that the kind of bluish green flowers on the antlers, even with the druidic herbs to preserve things, have begun to wilt a little bit. Would it occur to Cesarine, now that you see one, your father's done this quite often, and they've never had black petals. It's always been this bluish green or blue or sometimes even purple, if they're special. Do you think it would cross Cesarine's mind that you saw one that's especially different?
Oh, absolutely. Given the amount of times he saw it, I think.
I think something, it just catches you there. But I think as you begin the process of helping your father, he will, I think in a way that isn't surprising given the current circumstances. I think you know how you're presenting. And you know your father's kind of expectation. I think your father will actually open a conversation in the way that he does, in kind of a deep, low voice, with a very kind of authoritarian tone, as he's still gutting the Adral and not even looking at you. But wherever you are in the room, he will say, "When are you taking the trial?"
To clear his throat. Just stalling a little bit, because he knows what he wants to say. But he has less of a luxury of sounding like an idiot talking to his father than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. He, with that hesitation, I think in a way that is just how your father is, which is inherently very violent, but not meant necessarily as a threat, but is nonetheless scary, will jam the knife down into the table and turn around, again with blood on his hands, to face you and look in your eyes as you give him whatever answer you're about to give.
There's an impulse to look away. I think Cesarine knows what happens, but that the energy could get considerably worse if he does. And he'll say, I spoke to Clarion yesterday, who requested we take the trial together. I'm considering her offer, and after I speak to her,
there is a bit of surprise on his face, saying you spoke to Clarion. he clearly thinks higher of her than he does of you. And without really acknowledging the words that you said and that you're considering, will say, then you'll train with her. And just turn back around, yank the knife out of the table, continue to work. I think you're still in the middle of like doing the stuff. But he seems content with this current course.
I'll fucking take it. I think, like, it does bristle him a little bit, the decision, but if it pleases his father, and that's all that interaction has to be, he'll just go back to doing what he was doing before and let it be.
As you finish up, I think in this time as well, like also getting some food in, finishing up, helping your father, you're free to pursue whatever you would like in the day, grabbing whatever you need to grab from the house, from the things that you've taken back. Before you step out the door, your father will say at you, maybe you could learn how to beat your brother into shape. You step outside and close the door on a sunny, humid day in the edge of town, and the day is yours.
I think Cesarine is starting this day with, like, weight. I think hearing his father say that is the type of reality check. His father was probably aiming for it to be like a, it has a different sort of effect. Kind of, once again, in a very, like, teen way, only really focusing on the things that are super pertinent to him or right in front of him. That sort of thrusts into his mind the remembrance of his brother's existence and what he might be potentially leaving behind for his brother. So we're starting the day strong, with lots of guilt.
It does occur to you that you've yet to see your brother. He definitely wasn't home, you would know.
I'm sure he's out, causing issues, being a rat. Do I know of places he would sort of frequent, where he would be if he wasn't home?
How
Possibly.
close are you and your brother? And has there been any distance over the years of growing up?
I think it's a similar but not the same closeness that Cesarine has for, like, their teeth. Perhaps a little bit more distant than that, just because of the watchfulness of their father. There is almost like there's a forced distance to some degree. But I think that there was a time in which they were closer, even if there was still that forced distance, or only very, very quiet acts of care. I imagine there was probably a point in Cesarine's life in which there were ways in which he would sort of take the fall for certain things for the sake of his younger brother. He's used to it. He knows what to expect as the older brother.
I think the current place he is, I think you know where to initially look. I think you go around to those places and you don't find him. I will make this another roll. This is reputation once more, as the only current system we have. As your brother's friends, the few that may be around town, you know how to find and would know how to ask where he is. Again, I'll go for just a 10 here. Reminder of our rules about D20 rolls. When you roll a 1 on the dice and you have a D4, then you discount the D4. The D4 doesn't exist. When you roll a 20, you take the D4 and roll it into a D6 and take whichever number is higher, because you will roll a D20 and a D4 at the same time, typically.
The D20 roll was a 4.
The D20 roll is a 4.
The D4 roll was a 1, so...
It's a 5. I think this is sensible, given the choices you have already made today. I don't think it would occur to Cesarine in such detail, but you imagine that your brother also knew what path you were aligned on, or what was expected of you. And sure, he would have had conversations with his friends about how either Cesarine's going to come home and maybe things will be different, or maybe this is when I lose him. And I think as the few friends see you and see in that haircut and the way you've cleaned yourself up, I think you get cold shoulders. I think they go, well, I don't know. They haven't seen him.
He knows he'll see his brother. At some point, he will see his brother. He's not even sure what he would say when he sees him, but he is now kind of just has this very general worry that sits in the back of his head. It'll probably sit in the back of his head for the rest of the day about him. Not in anything that would happen to him today, just given the words that his father said to him. He's just kind of stuck there now. And at this point, I suppose he might go seek out Varian. Gods know if he goes back and his dad asks about it again.
As you continue, or rather move on from this current course of action, heading to where you know Clarion and her mother live, again seeing the patrolling legion on the streets, there is this quiet to belong. People don't live too loudly or brightly here. There's, even if the streets were to be as crowded as Fimmel, they're not so lively. And I think walking along the kind of outer road far away from the coast, at a moment that you find yourself alone, you see once more the Adral, silvery white eyes, black petaled flowers on its antlers, no more than 10 feet off the road, looking at you. And it's the kind of initial feeling, whatever it may be that Cesarine has, you don't have time to process it as it. You didn't see it move before, but it moves, kind of cocks its head and takes kind of 2 steps and then a half step and observes you in a way that seems very curious.
I don't think it's a conscious thought of like what the fuck is going on, but I think like the very like in his underbrain, there's just definitely a feeling of like, okay, this is getting weird, but not in a way that, again, he's very like consciously putting together. I think that when he's looking at this thing, there's definitely still that kind of like overwhelming, like, oh, like it just feels strange that it keeps happening. It feels strange given this morning. Maybe in a way he like kind of like gaslight himself a little bit about it. There's for like a logical answer, but there's none. I think he'll try to take like a very like hesitant step forward.
As you take a step forward, a kind of slow and cautious approach, it takes the sign and takes like another 3 steps closer. and again kind of observes you. I think again it moves with more confidence and quickness than you do, but also is like seems to be mindful as you kind of finish that first stride. Do you take another step?
Given that it stepped towards me instead of seeming spooked by my first step, yeah, I'll take another step.
You will approach each other, and it will begin to, in that initial interaction, like inspect you and sniff you. If you hold out a hand, it will kind of sniff, and will kind of lift a leg a little bit as if to like reach out and poke you, but not follow through and put it back down, and look up at you with again, there's this curiosity where before it felt more stoic and certain. Now it's just behaving a little bit differently.
I think given that I had, like Cesarine had the realization earlier, like that day, that most draws don't look like this, I think there's like a kind of like as it sniffs at him, Cesarine is also very curious as well. He looks kind of like that, like touching everything, looks at the black petals and maybe shifts focus to its eyes.
The eyes seem not like solid objects, but pools of energy. There is the ever slight kind of shift and shimmer. Its head is maybe a little bit above your waist, and the antlers maybe come up to around sternum, chest area. It will, as you know, the initial interaction ends, will step around so that it is facing you in the direction that you were walking. It's like getting in front of you, and in a very sort of majestic stance, despite its size, but this very confident posture will look at you and face you. And there is this sense of empathy and curiosity. It seems though like expectant of something.
I think for a moment, Cesarine is so like caught off guard by that energy. I think it's hard for Cesarine to read that kind of thing. I think there's like maybe at first like an impulse to kind of like look around and see if anybody else is around, but he's kind of afraid that the same thing will happen last time, where he'll look away and it'll be gone. I think it feels like maybe he's going insane a little bit. Like he doesn't, again, it's not a conscious realization, but like in his head, there's a little bit of like a, I might be losing it a little. I think his instinct here, a look of expectance from what is an animal in his brain, albeit a very, very strange animal. He's going to reach out, but less in a, here, sniff me away this time, and more in like a, let's see if it'll let me touch it type of way. He's not really sure what's going on, but he doesn't really want to just leave the situation either. It's weird and it keeps happening.
As you reach out, it will let you touch it. It will kind of hold that stance. And as you reach out and like touch its head or its snout, it's hard to see where its eyes are looking. But after a moment, it will let out a very exasperated sigh in a way that's like, that's too human. Who let out the sigh and kind of like take a step closer. So it kind of like move not even into your hand, but past your hand. And with the antlers kind of give you a nudge that kind of turns your hip like a little bit, or tends to turn your hip like a little bit to the side.
Right. Strange and bizarre creature. I think with a little bit more like of the forcefulness happening there is like a moment of pause, and Cesarine will probably say something like, "Can I can I help you? Like out loud. Just like start talking.
It looks at you in a way that you feel like it understands what you said. And there's definitely a rapport with this animal right now that is taking a tone that is a little sassy.
Sassing me.
And very, very, in a way that is very graceful and very non-threatening, but will kind of like slowly raise to like not all the way to its hind legs, not fully standing up, but raised in such a way where it can put one kind of hoof up and again kind of push against you in a way that's also a little bit turning. In a way that's just, it's deeply unclear what the expectation is. I think especially for Cesarine.
Currently.
Yeah, fully. But yeah, it will do that and then go back to the ground and just look at you expectantly.
We going somewhere? She's just gonna start talking to me. He has no other options.
You see, it's back on the ground. And there's a moment again where it looks at you, bit of a sigh, and will back up and kind of walk to the other side of the road, so like to your right side, and will look again, still kind of turn around to face you. So now it's facing you from the side, and will look to the right down the road where you were headed towards Clarion, and look to the left. From where you came from, and then look at you.
Before, when like the position it was in before was standing in front of the way I was going towards Clarence.
Mm-hmm.
I think this time Cesarine will also kind of like look towards like the way that he was going, and then maybe back. I've never wanted to vibe check I've said vibe check a horse. It's so bad.
I don't think Cesarine knows what's going on.
Knows anything? No. I think he's standing there, like kind of like probably like arms out a little bit, kind of like this. Again, just absolutely flabbergasted. But now, given that he's seen this thing so many times, had that weird realization, and now this thing is pushing him all about, sighing in an unusual way and sassing him with his being. Cesarine feels like he can't just like walk past and be like, that was weird, and like keep going. So he's gonna put like his hands on his hips. And he's gonna say, if there's something that you need, you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific than that, sir. Or ma'am.
It will cock its head. And I think all it will do, it will walk back up to you to your side. Or I think still facing you. Look toward, again, the road ahead and the road behind. Will look up at you in a way that, again, feels expectant. And then will walk past you back towards where you initially saw it, in neither of the directions that it looked in, back into the forest, and look back at you for a moment in a way that strangely feels like goodbye, and walk kind of behind a tree that is not wide enough to like cover its whole body, but walk behind it and disappear completely.
Cesarine kicks some dirt. He kicks some dirt, and a very, what the fuck was any of that energy? It was cool, but it feels weird. It feels strange. She's gonna kind of stand there and like stare at that tree for a second. Maybe in like a little bit of thought. Because that felt really bizarre. I think the unfortunate thing is like the very first thing that comes to his brain is like, I should go tell Dirtique about that. When he's hit with teenage depression. I think there's also like the immediate thought of like, this feels like some magic people bullshit. This he kind of thinks that maybe there might be somebody who might have a better idea of what the fuck is going on there, but he doesn't really know who he would even ask, after maybe a moment of thought, he's just going to kind of turn back towards Clarion's house, or the direction that she lives in, turn back towards the tree, maybe take like a few of his first steps being backwards before he'll finally be like, okay, it's
Continue
gone.
On.
He's sussed out right now, okay?
I will frame this in a way that I don't think would be framed in Cesarine's mind. But as you, I think, continue down the path towards Clarion's house, I think there's probably a couple moments where you look back towards the tree, but also towards the path that you came from that would lead you closer to Dertig, and then continue down the path that leads you closer to Clarion and the Legion, without reflecting on what the Odral might have wanted or hoped you had chosen the option that it hoped you would go for. Continuing on to Clarion's home, she's probably doing something that is very, what's the word, stimulating for Cesarine, just chopping wood outside with great stance, arms out, very, very muscly young woman that I imagine might just break Cesarine's brain a little bit as you walk up. I imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that Cesarine might approach to outside the house and just kind of look for a sec, just kind of look in a way that just short circuit. Absolutely,
that was already in my brain. That I don't think he would even know what to there would just be a moment of blinking in that direction, and followed by an immediate oh fuck, I'm really about to do this. I'm gonna look really fucking stupid for possibly weeks, but now I'm here. Okay. She looks like she's seen me.
I think by the time that it might occur to you to say something, she will take notice, and with the axe in hand, under the kind of red canopies, the sparse red canopies, in terms of a much nicer home than I think yours, and you see again, I think she does live in a part of town that is more you live on the outskirts. There's a couple buildings around, but they're a little far away, or not a little far away, but a good 50, 60 feet. I think she lives closer to other people, and there are people who are walking around, a cart passing by of someone taking from a small farm on the outside of town into town for the day. You see she will look back, sweat upon her brow, her black hair braided tightly, her muscly arms dipped in beads of sweat, and holding kind of the axe one hand as she wipes, and will say, "Oh, Cesarine, have you made a decision already?"
He opens his mouth. I think words don't leave them for a few seconds. There's a very quickly going through his head of what the fuck am I doing here? I do not belong here. I need to leave. But then also the idea of going home and his dad asking him about this and him being terrible. He doesn't want that. He'll shut his mouth and then he'll open it again, and this time he'll actually say words. And he'll say, I thought about our conversation, and I think joining up would be good for both of us, fully knowing that in his head he thinks he's the only person benefiting from this at all.
You see, she says, "Good. Do you have a sword or a weapon?"
No.
I was going to go down to the blacksmith. My mother is going to pay for one for me. But being the wartime leader and being a member of the Legion, I'm sure we could pick one up for you as well.
No, that's, you know, I can.
Well, if we're going to be training, you need a weapon.
Yeah,
no, I can.
I can figure it out. I can do that for myself. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'll have one.
Roll reputation again. DC 12.
Okay, so it's a 7 total.
You see, she goes in a way that is very like Legion. It's not intended to be so like rude and unkind, but just kind of the way that like people raised in the Legion around that culture are. She goes, well, there's no point fucking around. And we'll just kind of turn to go dip her head inside. And again, in a way that like in her mind is not dismissive, but in a way I think like Cesarine, who's not as much embraced the culture, I think it's like a little jab of like ow, and a tiny point of stress. You see that she'll again dip her head inside and then come back out and says, my mother has no issue. We should both be armed if we're joining the Legion, even if we stay in Boulogne or not. She's the wartime leader. There's no sense in burdening you with it. And you see that a couple of moments later, her mother will walk out. Woman, obviously, I don't know why. Human woman, I think that's what I was going for. Human woman. I think her hair is grayer than your father's, although I think she's only a little bit older than your father. Heavily scarred woman. Old, but has that like kind of aged strength, like a alcohol increasing its flavor over time. I don't drink. I don't know if that's how it works.
I'm just making shit up.
I saw something about wine on TikTok today, and that's what was on my mind. But
to talker, she sounds very sexy.
She's to some, maybe, she fully is a fascist, but
look, that's on you, okay? That's your fault for making the fascist sexy.
You see she will step out, and there is, to switch the tone in the fully opposite direction, she will look at you in a way that is taking the stock of you, and there is a little bit of like looking down on you in the way that your father does. And she will look at her daughter in the same kind of way. And I think when your father had done it to you, it's just how that interacts, or it's just how that goes. It's just how that feels. You never really reflected on it. When she like looks at her daughter in a way that is like observing the quality of a weapon and not regarding your child, does it occur to Cesarine like how cold and fucked up that is? Or is it just kind of like, yeah, this is the only thing you're used to from your father, and you don't make anything of it from Clarion's mother?
I don't think it registers in a very conscious way. I don't think there's nothing there. I definitely think it like evokes a feeling from Cesarine, something a little visceral, something from the pit of his stomach. But I don't think he can he consciously clocks that the parallel like with his father. That being said, I think he's also entirely overwhelmed.
She's a
although
scary
probably doing probably doing a fair job at kind of presenting himself in the same way he probably tries to present himself to his father. Having a reaction is not a good thing, I guess. I think in Cesarine's mind, it's kind of like the same, like don't speak unless spoken to, and the same thing of like just kind of keep it. She definitely could be the type of person who could pick it out, but I think like at least the very most surface level, he doesn't appear overly nervous, but he is.
She will again take stock of her daughter, looking at and being impressed by as well, the weapon that she has potential to become, will raise her hand holding a pouch of coin and say, a weapon that suits you, no better. She looks to her daughter. And again, I think in a way that like Cesarine doesn't super consciously clock and Clarion doesn't super consciously clock, but it's like putting her in her place, even as like a young, strong person with potential, putting her in her place and just reminding her where she is on the rung. And Clarion rather, will turn to you, take a deep breath, as without even saying goodbye, like the two just kind of turn and part ways. And Clarion will walk towards you and just kind of like give you a slap on the shoulder to follow her. And we'll begin to get going.
I think in Cesarine's mind, he's mostly just like, he's a little nervous about the concept of something being paid for him by specifically Clarion's mother. Mostly because she's not entirely sure how his father would feel about that. I think that when it comes to anything related to any of these individuals, there's always a risk factor. Just like in any given interaction, he is like fucking calculating the risk of the things that he says, under the assumption that they might come back to his father. And I think he's a little anxious, but it's also what's done is done.
Heading back towards the kind of center of the town, I think having left Fimmel behind and knowing that you probably won't see it again, I think is the first time that you really take stock of like, oh, it was a really nice, quaint place over there. It was. You would describe it as, or some people might describe it as lovely. I don't think Cesarine is the type of person right now to be like, that's lovely, you know?
No.
But there is this feeling of having lost something by just being in Bellum. Dirtier streets, kind of grayer tone, mud caked on the walls. No one bothers to maintain it as much. The heavy kind of white gold patrols of the Legion. Just even in like the armor and the presence. There's a bit of a Legion presence in Fimmel, but there's safeguard as well. And there's an air of kindness that does not so much exist here. Coming to the blacksmith, you see a man, dark brown skin, black hair, with a little bit of volume to it, dark eyes, reasonably well built out, probably in his 40s, so a bit younger than your father and Clarion's mother. I think has a very kind of serious focus to him, but in a very direct way, is comfortable to be around. Someone who does not deal in such like aggressions, or has the kind of like passive aggression that your father and Clarion's mother does, but just very direct, and it's like, you know what you're dealing with. You don't necessarily have to anticipate this guy's moves. Clarion will probably do the first bit of introduction of like, hey, join the Legion. He'll ask like what you're used to. What, and it doesn't need to be a thing that Cesarine is also certain about. Because if I understand, or I'm picking up the vibes of the character, I don't think any of these weapons will be right. But what answer does he give? A, correct. B, I think he gives like the only answer he thinks like, well, I have only ever held one weapon a handful of times, and it was always a sword. I don't think he says all that, but I think that's like the answer he gives. It's like a very simple sword. You see Clarion, I think, with a bit of like wonder, this excites her a bit more, looking at these weapons, and we'll probably pick out an axe of some kind. A simple blade, but large, and in her hands looks quite intimidating. You see that there is almost like a bloodlust in her eyes as she picks up the weapon. She looks at it and thinks about what she will be able to do with it. Whether she's fully thinking about taking human lives or not, whether she's thought that far. I think as a short sword of some kind enters your hand, I think even a short sword, because you are smaller and are particularly impressive in any way, I think as it enters your hand, or you're handed one, it's hard to grip. It just doesn't sit well in your hand. And the blacksmith will say in a very casual, non-callous way, just observing, will say, it looks like you have some work to do. But I think that the blade in Cesarine's hand, you just know it does not belong.
You wouldn't say anything. I think it's just another thing that keeps that kind of like pool of anxiety growing. Like, yeah, there's a little anxiety in the meter, a little bit of a funny ha-ha. But I think given like every little thing that's happened over like the last couple of days, that weight in his stomach just like sinks for further and further and further. I think it's just another one of those little pebble on top of that mound of rocks in his gut. Yeah, no kind of wait for Clarion's lead.
I think Clarion there's a excitement to her. And again, that is perhaps like even a little twisted. In a way that when you've been raised with the image of violence, she doesn't realize how kind of weird it is for a young person to be like, I'm gonna be a fascist, you know. My role in life is going to be to walk the streets and beat people up and nothing more, you know. Like I don't. But she's like, oh, I'm like ascending to my place in life. But I think in a way that's like, it's very easy for Cesarine to like ride along those coattails, and she'll take quite a bit of initiative because she takes her own training very seriously, and will take quite a bit of initiative, like to come get you in the morning and train with you, and spend perhaps like all day together in a way that she also like, there are those little comments here and there that might just be like, ooh, ow, like little pricks, but I think is much more comfortable than speaking to Dertig or the idea of confronting that. So over the course of the next 2 or 3 days, I will also mention that your brother is quite elusive.
Oh, fuck.
If he does sleep in the house, he probably waits for you and your father to be asleep before he sneaks in, and then sneaks out early in the morning. So for the next 2 or 3 days, you do not see him. And for the next 2 or 3 days, Clarion begins to take the lead with like getting you to like exercise and train you. And also like, you do begin to eat a little bit more around her. Like one of the things we talked about that I'll bring up for the first time in this actual play is that your father doesn't make that much money and doesn't always have that much food, and when he does, he gets his fill first. So one of the reasons that you are maybe not as big as you could be is because you've been barely fed most of your life. But all that, Clarion takes the lead, Do you at any point in those first couple of days attempt to break away to go speak to Der Teague? Or is that too difficult to confront? Or does it even like really stay on Cesarine's mind in a way that like you want to talk to him?
I think for those first few days, no. I think he thinks about it. I think Cesarine thinks about it. I think mostly at night. It's kind of like he spends all day distracted, and it's almost like a welcome distraction. I don't think about this; it doesn't exist. If I'm training with Clarion, their tea doesn't exist. My brother doesn't exist. Nothing exists. And it's when he goes home that things like that start to like kind of eat at him. So I think for those first few days, no, I think he doesn't make a point to break away. He's also probably getting his ass kicked, so...
Yeah, for sure. Bruises begin to decorate your skin at the hands, to some degree, of at least a future member of the Legion. An unfortunate theme of your life. On that third day, there is a feeling that you are being watched. On this particular day, Clarion will kind of go out to the hills outside of Milan and beyond the roads into, again, kind of dynamic terrain of the kind of sparse forest. Diam bird flies into a tree, drops, rolls. Cesarine comes and grabs it up.
No!
Clarion talks about like the importance of when you are a soldier being able to like adapt to terrain, being able to like fight in environments, being able to like use what you have to your advantage. And that's the purpose of like the training today, an additional perspective. I think Cesarine is learning because it's like all you're doing, but your body's in pain. This kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going along with it. And I think as Clarion like knocks you to the ground, I think even you maybe have like a couple of cuts here and there, like from the axe. Both of you are being careful to like not murder each other. But it's like, these are sharp weapons. They're not dull. As she knocks you to the ground, and the sword kind of falls out of hand, and you've learned at this point to like reach for it, reaching over and turning back to her. You see that up the elevation, standing behind her, is the Adral once more, staring at you. Clarion begins to approach in that kind of menacing way. But I imagine Cesarine's mind for a moment is caught. And she, I think, will take note of that as out of the ordinary of the past few days and look over and go, huh. And will look back at you and look back at the Adral. That's strange. And will kind of reach down to help you up.
I think like he'll kind of see it like, in his peripheral, and he'll kind of reach out, but I don't think he like takes his eyes off of like the Adral itself. I think he's still watching, even as he like takes that off.
She'll very easily lift you to your feet. And I think both of you will turn to look at it. And she'll kind of like put her axe in her hand in a way that's like, this is quite odd. Not super defensive, but just ready. And it will kind of partially obscured by a tree, will step out from behind it and close the distance about halfway. And Clarion it's clearly looking at you. And she'll kind of look at you as well and say, what's going on? What is this?
Cesarine is like immediately filled with that. Okay, so I'm not crazy, but also this is making me feel crazy. Because somebody else has acknowledged the existence of this thing. But he'll say, he's kind of like still just looking at it. say, I think he's going to tell partial truth. Without looking away from Theodore, he'll say, I don't know. I think I saw the same one the other day. If sniffed me. It's weird, right? Have you ever seen one that looks like that?
See, she says, I don't think so. It's weird eyes.
Yeah, right?
It sniffed you? It was it like normal?
Yeah, just like sniff my hands. I think, maybe it wanted food or something. I heard you shouldn't feed wild animals because they'll keep coming back. Maybe someone fed it at some point. I don't know. Maybe that's why it's friendly. I don't necessarily feel like Cesarine is a good liar, by the way.
I don't think Clarion's particularly intuitive. So I think
yeah, weird.
she'll though lower the axe and even kind of put it down and crouch down in a way that she's kind of looking for like the same result of like, oh, it will sniff me as well, and kind of like reach out her hand and it will look at her and approach you. It will kind of look at her in a way that like acknowledges her presence, but then looks to you, and there's again this sense of like expectation, and she'll kind of like watch it approach you in a way that's like, oh, this is extra weird. And the draw will come up and a bit more forceful, like with some pressure applied, will just walk up to you, antlers gently against your like stomach, and push you backwards.
Cesarine is going to say the words out loud. Not this song and dance again. He's like he the point of flabbergasted he reached at like their last interaction has been met so much faster this time. But it's a little bit more like familiar this time. You know what I mean? Like the vibe of like, oh, like here we go again. Like there is that familiarity there. And he'll kind of like let it push him, but then still be like, what are you? Here we go.
It will continue to push you maybe like 20 feet away from Clarion. Just like very like firm, gentle, but firm, before stopping and giving you some space and looking up at you like expectantly. And you see Clarion is at this point, she stood up and is like just again flabbergasted. But also like there's a little bit of tension between you and her as she's like, what is your deal? Like, what are you, how are you involved in this?
I think Cesarine is going to just like, in like an attempt to like test out what it wants from him. He'll kind of like take like maybe a couple steps back into the side, like in the kind of like back of the direction it was pushing it, and like just kind of moving a little bit on his own, just to see like if it moves at all with him, if it leaves, if it pushes him again, if it does anything. He's just kind of watching and waiting for reaction, trying to figure out what it wants.
As you take a couple of steps back, it will stay where it is and watch you. And Clarion will kind of say, what do you think it wants?
I don't know. And I think he just kind of sit there, like kind of like stuttering for a second. And he says, I guess like a little bit more honest this time. He'll say, well, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out last time either. But he looks at me like he does want something. Wants me to not be here right now. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's an animal and it's just pushing me to push me. And he'll like kind of like take a few steps back forward, like toward where he was standing before.
You see it will. The sigh this time is not so exasperated, but almost mournful. And you see, it feels as though the eyes are like welling up of this animal. And it will meet you again with a less firm approach. And there is a tear in its right eye that it will wipe against your hand if it can. The aches and pains of your body are alleviated, and to a degree that you don't even realize how much you heal. One of the first cuts that's like scabbed over will almost disappear, but it's just a strange sense of like, oh, you feel like a bit more flexible. And Clarion, seeing not necessarily the effect, but watching this thing like interact with you, her suspicion is rising. The withdrawal will back up and bow its head, and again look at you with expectation, some unknown expectation, and will then, I think, quite quickly like snap its head to the side to look further into the forest, and then run towards the nearest tree and disappear behind it.
And watch it run off. I think the minute it's out of view, he'll look over at Clarion, just still kind of like dumbfounded by the whole thing. The very like, what the fuck was that? Look at her. And I think he'll kind of like maybe look in the direction that the draw looked like before it ran off.
You're someone who oftentimes, looking at the direction that it looked to or that it ran off in?
That it looked to.
Mm. You're someone who oftentimes needs to anticipate patterns, people's behaviors, call out and look for details. Would you like to commit to intuition, the Saga's equivalent of wisdom, as a skill for you?
Yes, I think it's appropriate for how I've played Cesarine.
Roll a d20 and add a d4 as you look off in the direction, and Clarion will begin to approach. And you do not see this, but she is looking at you and taking note of the healed marks on your body before you have. She's focused on that. You see up the hill, through the tree, a tall figure, adorned in all white armor, head to toe, a good distance away. And although it is different than you had dreamed of, it makes you feel the same to see it. In broad daylight, at a distance, feels as though you were looking at the White Knight. Your brain does not process as Clarion just puts her hand on your arm to inspect, like the healed cut or bruises. What does Cesarine do?
I think for like the first moment, he's just absolutely frozen, just sort of stuck in that fear and dread. And breathing probably picks up. And I think like weaker, much, much weaker than he intends for it to be, will kind of like mutter Clarion's name. I think he means to say it louder than he does. He means to be more urgent, but kind of like eyes stuck up on the hill. He just like can't like get like the force to lead, that kind of force to lead himself.
She will look at you and see the change in disposition and look to where you are looking, where this White Knight is walking through the forest, there are these hints of streaks of crimson red on the armor, like dripping blood. She will look out and say, "What the fuck?" This has been Cesarine's Saga, with Tucker Patterson as Cesarine and Jesse T. William as the guide. This story uses the Legacy and Saga TTRPG designed by Jesse T. William. It is edited and scored also by Jesse T. William.